Welcome to day 2 of Wordstock 2. This video is part of a collaboration with a lot of other Authortubers. Their channels and video links will be in the description box below, and there will also be a playlist created afterwards. So I hope you'll check them out. I hope that you will give them a like and a subscribe, because in the world of YouTube, that's the only way we can find one another. Make yourself known. And if you want to participate in future Wordstock collabs, let me know that too, because I'll be making a list for the next one, which will probably take place in May. Tension is a powerful emotion, one that we don't care much for when it turns up in real life. In fiction, however, it's what pulls readers into your story. And what people despise in their day-to-day, they often love in fiction. Because the issues that we create that build that strong emotion and then finally in the end releases that tension, it becomes therapeutic for readers. And how does it differ from suspense? And more importantly, how can you utilize it effectively to keep readers turning pages? That's what's coming up on today's episode of The Story Detective. Stick around. If suspense is psychological, that feeling of anxious uncertainty about what might happen to a character, then tension is when the reader's worst fears become a reality. Consequently, the reader's stress level spikes, and they can't read fast enough to see what happens next. There's some information out there that confuses suspense and tension. Well, a lot of people do. It's kind of natural. And yet, some of this comes under the idea of scene level tension, which is something you hear quite a bit about when tension is talked about, or how to create it in scenes. Simplified, tension, scene level tension, is any action that manifests itself into conflict. That's really all there is to it. Those never-ending fight scenes or explosions that create tension in most blockbuster films. They utilize the most expedient and immediate ways of building stress for an audience. And that's useful to know, but they do the same things over and over. So as these films are mass-produced in large numbers, tension doesn't really rise beyond a certain level because we almost know what's coming. We can predict it, sometimes without fault, because we've seen the same thing in dozens of other movies, just with different characters under slightly different circumstances. This is how cliches are created, and not necessarily good stories. So let's look at some alternatives. Dialogue is a major source of conflict. It has characters saying the wrong thing. It has them continually coming at one another from opposing sides. A command, for example, always increases tension because nobody likes to be told what to do. People don't like to be talked down to either. So consider that. People in positions, from high positions to low positions. You could get someone who gets promoted to a manager at the local grocery store, and suddenly they're trained to crack the whip in order to motivate employees to doing better work. And yet, often it has quite the opposite effect. They may work, but they're not going to be motivated to do better work. But imagine if an employee disobeys that order. Conflict and tension ensue. Let's take a look at some dialogue that is absolutely toothless. Setting the stage, let's say a character is coming home from a long day at work. His spouse or partner is cooking an elaborate dinner. Maybe she's even wearing something slightly provocative. She, how was your day? He, Bill called out, I got stuck doing double duty. She, sounds like an after-dinner back rub might be in order. He, a perfect ending to an imperfect day. What's wrong with it? First of all, we can't tell anything about these characters, aside from the fact that they're very accommodating, maybe a little too perfect. Maybe some readers would stick around if they were looking for a potential sex scene, but where's the story? Let's revise and add just a hint of teeth. She, how was your day? He, Bill is an asshole. She, I was thinking after dinner. He, I'm tired. The scene starts exactly the same, but now his response isn't so obliging. He doesn't answer her question directly. The best dialogue doesn't give direct responses, or even logically follow what the other person said. Bill is an asshole is indirect, oblique. People often don't listen to one another. They think about what they want to say or talk about instead. We don't know why Bill is an asshole, but he's obviously angry and blames Bill for his attitude. And when she starts to propose a plan for the evening, he doesn't even allow her to finish. "I'm tired." Squashes her intentions outright. We see he's not an overly nice guy. We also begin to smell a bit of a story, and that's because he's antagonistic. Nothing overly important has happened yet, but since dialogue is always physical action, there's suddenly a hint of tension in the air, which inspires us to empathize with her, and we want to know what happens next. Anything that's unexpected or a surprise creates tension. Let's look at some ways in which tension and suspense work together, and how one leads into the other. Alfred Hitchcock was a master of suspense, and by being a master of suspense, he was also a master at creating tension, because suspense is what exacerbates and gives way to tension. Think of that scene in Psycho with Janet Leigh. When she's in the shower, suspense is created because we see a tiny shadow, a little movement against the shower curtain, and we think, is that somebody out there? What's going on? It's really creepy. And the suspense mounts until that shower curtain is pulled aside and Norman Bates is standing there with a knife. And suddenly tension explodes on the scene because of the buildup of that suspense. So tension is the outcome of suspense personified. A phone ringing in the middle of the night is always suspenseful because we think it has to be something bad, because who would be calling at that hour? And when the character answers the phone and the worst comes to pass, then tension is born. Think about how easy it is to create that tension. Just 3 little words. We said that dialogue often creates tension. What if the person picks up the phone and the voice on the other end says, "I see you"? The reader's heartbeat immediately increases, and that's exactly what a writer wants. And if you think about it, all the technology we currently have that's cataloging our every movement, news stories that talk about terrorism, carjackings, home invasions, more than ever, people are afraid of things that invade their private space. 3 little words, "I see you," does that, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to get there. The best way to create tension is through a character's actions, or reactions with other characters. Conflict can be generated over the most mundane of circumstances to life or death situations, because your characters will not agree with one another. They will assume opposition out of denial or fear. Think of Rashomon, and give your characters different points of view. Even if they all witness the same events, police will quickly separate eyewitnesses before questioning them. This is because once they start talking, people will often shift their point of view to agree with the strongest or most dominant opinion among them. Not everyone sees accurately either. Events are colorized by mood, beliefs, and personal biases. Your hero's world can quickly begin falling apart once problems start, and find they are being pushed or pulled in half a dozen different directions by those around them. Even their best friends and family. Make that especially by their closest friends and family, because those are the characters whose best intentions quickly muddy the waters your hero finds themselves drowning in. All of which sustains suspense about what will happen next, and sparks tension on every level of their existence. I'll tell you a real-life story that transitions suspense into tension. When I was 5 years old, my parents moved into a new house. My father at the time was also starting a new job. The neighborhood wasn't exactly the kind of neighborhood where neighbors talk to one another in a friendly attitude. They pretty much kept to themselves and were more likely to look at you from their windows and make assumptions. And for reasons that aren't completely known to me, maybe because they just bought a house and my father was starting a new job, maybe they needed to get a little bit further ahead in their bills, a phone was not immediately installed. Father worked a very early shift in those days. I remember him getting up at 3:30 in the morning and was out of the house like an hour later. In the darkness of those early morning hours, someone started pounding on our door. Loud, frantic banging, as if someone were in trouble. When my mother went to the door to see if somebody was there, nobody was outside. Now, my father thought it was kids playing some kind of a practical joke. There was a good chance he was right. It was a new neighborhood. Kids love to play tricks on new neighbors. But did he go to the phone company and have a phone installed? Just in case? No, he didn't. A few nights later, the banging happened again. I remember sitting huddled in the dark with my 3-year-old brother and my mother afraid to turn on the lights because she thought whoever it was still might be prowling around outside, and if she turned on the lights, they would be able to see us. Several weeks went by after that night. No phone was installed. No banging happened either within that time frame. We got used to the idea that it probably was kids and it was over. Then one night, I felt a hand shaking me. I woke up and my mother was standing next to my bed, and she told me not to raise my voice or be alarmed, but the knocker had returned. Again, my brother and I huddled on the couch as my mother paced, terrified. She went to the door and peeked out of a small window that was high on top of the door. Then she went to the windows, checking to see if anyone was prowling around outside. She told us to put on our shoes and then gathered us by the door. She said, "When I open this door, run to the neighbor's house as fast as you can. Don't stop no matter what you see or hear. And if I'm not with you by the time you reach the neighbor's porch, bang on that door as loud as you can until someone answers." She gave a final look through the window, unlocked the deadbolt, pulled the door open, and said, "Run." And that, my friends, is tension. And the longer the writer stretches it out for several paragraphs or pages, the more impactful the tension will be when the action finally ensues. Did we ever find out who the knocker was? Actually, it occurred on and off for a while. My father, for a while, worked a later shift, so he was there throughout the night and nothing. But as soon as he went back to that early shift again, the knocking started happening. But even after neighbors were aware, the police were aware, nobody ever found out who it was. Years later, my brother and a friend are talking to this guy that lives on the hill behind my parents. He was behind all the houses that were like the 4 houses facing the street, that was one of which was my parents. And he told us that he owned all that property. And by 2000 something or other, I think it was either 2012, I think my brother said it was 2018, that the land was all going to revert back to him, and he couldn't wait to kick us all out of our homes and reclaim that property. So I think the guilty party gave himself away, at least to my way of thinking. And again, that's the kind of neighborhood it was. Small town, very Stephen King-esque. Remember to check out the other videos in this series, and until next time, keep those keyboards clacking.